Imagine a house that looks like the blueprint of the perfect American dream. A manicured lawn, a towering but elegant mansion with a ballroom, a library, rooms filled with polished furniture and gentle sunlight. Inside, a family everyone saw as respectful, faithful, and tightly knit. A mother who doted on her children, 3 kids with bright futures, and a father who never raised his voice, never caused trouble, and seemed to walk with the confidence of someone who had everything in order. But behind one locked door, at the far end of that mansion, a man stood completely alone, tightening his grip around a gun, preparing to do the unthinkable. On November 9th, 1971, inside a quiet neighborhood in Westfield, New Jersey, something horrifying unfolded. Something so chilling, so cold, so meticulously planned that even investigators decades later would still talk about it with a sense of disbelief. This wasn't a crime of rage. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't chaotic. It was calm, controlled, organized, and carried out by someone who believed, truly believed, that he was doing the right thing. That man was John Emile List. Now, at first glance, John was the kind of man who blended into the background. A clean-cut accountant, a devout Lutheran, a father who drove his kids to church every Sunday, a husband who provided, a man who seemed to stand firmly on the pillars of faith, discipline, and routine. But underneath that polished exterior lived a trembling insecurity. John was a man who despised failure, feared humiliation more than death, and believed reputation was everything. And when the financial world around him began to collapse, so did the last threads of his sanity. To understand what happened inside that mansion, you need to understand who John List was. John grew up in a strict, deeply religious household. His parents drilled discipline into him from the moment he could talk. There was no room for excuses, no room for emotion, no room for anything that deviated from what they believed to be righteous. That upbringing shaped him into a man who followed rules to the letter, a man who equated worth with work, faith with obedience, and morality with control. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't socialize much. He was introverted, serious, rigid, almost unnervingly so. When he married his wife Helen, she was vibrant, social, and independent. But over time, illness and alcoholism changed her. She became depressed, withdrawn, and at times cruel. She mocked John's intimate shortcomings, insulted him in public, and made him feel humiliated, something John could not handle. But there was something deeper too. Helen was sick, very sick. She had contracted a disease years earlier, long before she met John, and never told him. It slowly deteriorated her health, her mood, and eventually her ability to function normally. John saw caring for her as a burden, but an obligation he had to keep. But that obligation was fueled less by love and more by fear of judgment. Still, none of this explains what came next. By the late 1960s, John lost his job. Then another, then another. His pride kept him from admitting it. Every morning, he put on his suit, grabbed his briefcase, left the house, and spent hours sitting in a train station, pretending he was still employed. He drained his savings, emptied his mother's accounts, borrowed against the house. And still, he couldn't maintain the lifestyle he thought his family deserved. He couldn't bear the idea of going on welfare. To him, that wasn't just financial assistance. It was the ultimate symbol of failure, a stain he believed would destroy his reputation forever. And in John's rigid worldview, it would drag his family into eternal damnation. So, instead of losing everything, he created a plan, a horrifying, twisted plan. On that cold November morning, John's children left for school, completely unaware that their father had already decided none of them would live to see the next day. While they were gone, John approached his wife from behind as she sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Without hesitation, without argument, without warning, he shot her in the back of the head. She collapsed instantly. He then walked upstairs to the 3rd floor, where his 84-year-old mother lived in a small apartment attached to the house. She heard the shot, but didn't panic. She trusted her son more than anyone. When he opened her door, she didn't scream or ask questions. She looked up from the breakfast she was preparing, confused. John raised the gun. She whispered, "Oh, John!" And just like that, he pulled the trigger again. But that wasn't the end. John dragged his wife's body across the kitchen floor, staining the linoleum with a long smear of blood. and positioned her on a sleeping bag in the mansion's grand ballroom, the room where her children had danced, where she had thrown parties, where she once felt alive. He cleaned himself up, ate lunch, ran errands, wrote notes, and waited. When his 16-year-old daughter arrived home from school, she didn't even make it past the kitchen before John shot her too. Then he waited for his younger son. Same fate. Cold, silent, efficient. But there was one more. His oldest son had after-school activities, so he didn't come home until much later. And because John had already spent hours killing and cleaning, something inside him broke. Investigators later discovered that his oldest son fought back. The crime scene told a story of chaos and fear, unlike the others. John shot him, and shot him, and shot him again. 5 times. As if purging the panic he felt for losing control. Once all 5 family members were dead, John carefully placed them all in the ballroom, lined up on sleeping bags, their arms folded neatly across their chests like they were resting. He turned the thermostat down to slow decomposition, cleaned the blood from the walls, casually explained to neighbors that the family was going on vacation, stopped mail delivery, stopped milk delivery, canceled the kids' school commitments. Every detail was accounted for. And then he sat down at his desk and wrote a confession letter addressed not to the police, not to the public, but to his pastor. In that 5-page letter, he explained that he killed his family to save them from a world he believed was falling into moral decay. He wrote that he couldn't stand the idea of his children losing their faith, that financial ruin would corrupt them. He believed God would forgive him because he did it to protect their souls. When investigators read that letter later, many of them described it as one of the most disturbing documents they had ever seen, not because of brutality, but because of its calmness, its logic, its terrifying conviction. After sealing the letter, turning off the lights, and making one final walk through the mansion, John locked the door and disappeared. For nearly a month, nobody suspected anything. Neighbors assumed the family was traveling. Mail didn't pile up. Nothing looked strange from the outside. But one night, a neighbor noticed something eerie. Inside that massive mansion, with dozens of rooms, dozens of windows, the lights were shutting off one by one, not all at once, slowly, methodically, over several days. Finally, someone grew suspicious enough to call police. When officers broke in, they walked into a place frozen in time. The smell hit them immediately, damp, cold air mixed with decay. There was eerie organ music playing from the home's intercom system on a loop. The house was quiet, too quiet. And then they found the bodies. 5 family members laid out with almost ceremonial precision in the ballroom. Upstairs, the body of John's mother, too heavy for him to move. In the study, the confession letter. But John List was nowhere to be found. What followed became one of the longest manhunts in American history. Years passed, then a decade, then 15 years. At times it seemed like he had vanished off the face of the earth, but he hadn't. John had simply started a new life. He fled across the country, eventually settling in Colorado under a new name. He got a new job, joined a new church, became a Boy Scout leader again. And even more disturbingly, he remarried. His second wife had no idea who he really was. To her, he was the quiet, polite accountant who always paid his bills on time. This man lived as a ghost around ordinary people for 18 years. 18 years. And he would have gotten away with everything if it weren't for one thing, a clay sculpture. In 1989, a forensic artist created an age-progressed bust of what John might look like nearly 2 decades after the murders. The sculpture aired on a popular true crime TV show. And the moment the image hit the screen, a woman watching at home froze. She whispered, "That's my neighbor. That's my neighbor." Within days, the FBI arrested him. When confronted, John tried to deny everything at first, but the evidence was undeniable. Fingerprints matched, records matched, everything matched. At trial, John List showed no emotion, no remorse. When asked why he did it, he repeated the same delusion from his letter. "I wanted to save their souls." He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. His second wife left him. He died in prison years later, never apologizing, never acknowledging the reality of what he did, never accepting that the salvation he claimed was nothing more than an excuse for a coward who couldn't face failure. To this day, the mansion where it all happened has long since been demolished, but people still say the land feels wrong. Something heavy lingers there, a chill, a silence, a memory that refuses to disappear. And the story continues to haunt us because it shatters one of the most fragile illusions we cling to, that the people we trust most would never turn into monsters. But sometimes, the calmest voice hides the darkest truth. Sometimes, the most ordinary man becomes the most terrifying ghost. And sometimes, the place you feel safest becomes the most dangerous place of all. Before we close tonight, I want to leave you with one last thought. Every week on this channel, we shine a light into the darkest corners of real cases just like this one. Stories that are unsettling, mysterious, and often forgotten. And if you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who belongs here. So, if you want to keep diving into these deep, chilling investigations with me, hit that subscribe button, not just as a viewer, but as part of this community. People who look closer, who question everything, who refuse to let these stories fade away. Drop a comment below with the case you want me to cover next. I read every single one, and your suggestions genuinely shape the videos we create here. Thanks for being here. Stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.